The Cold War by Ava, Alexa, and Faria. World War II ended in 1945 with the atomic bombs leading to Japan's surrender. The Soviet Union was emerging and getting stronger as a communist nation, and America was a capitalist nation, so they didn't really like that much. America and the Soviet Union were pretty much competing for resources around the world as two of the most powerful countries in the world at the time. The Marshall Plan was an American initiative to aid Europe. Many European countries were left in poverty after the war, so the U.S. provided $13 billion worth of economic recovery programs to Europe in 1947. The Yalta Conference was a conference in early February 1945. Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin were all present. There, they discussed the occupation of Germany and who would go where. At the conference, Stalin promised to allow free elections in his nation. That did not turn out to be true. Okay, this is just some vocabulary. So there are 3 different kinds of war. Hot war is like lava. It's super hot and like there's actual warfare. Armies are fighting. It's all going on. Okay? And then warm war, like a warm glass of milk, is when no armies have actually begun like fighting each other, but they're prepared to fight, they're prepared for invasions, and but like the leaders of the countries or nations are just like talking and hoping that they don't have to fight, so that like peace can come without any people or without any blood being spilled. And then Cold War is when no fighting is actually happening, and it's just kind of tension. It's just a lot of tension. And then a satellite nation is a nation that, this isn't on the slide. There isn't a picture for this. You're just gonna have to pay attention. A satellite nation is a nation that is independent officially, but it's being controlled by some other nation. And then a couple differences between America and the Soviet Union is that America has free elections, it's democratic and capitalist. And the Soviet Union had no elections, it was autocratic or a dictatorship. I was going to say democracy, but it's definitely not that. And it was communist. The Iron Curtain was not a real physical barrier. The term Iron Curtain was coined by Winston Churchill. It was an ideological barrier that cut off the Soviet Union from the rest of Europe. He used the word curtain to imply that everything going on behind it was unknown to the rest of the world, and iron to show that it was unbreakable. So I included some maps of where that, ideological curtain was. The Truman Doctrine of 1947 was a doctrine that established that the U.S. was meant to provide all kinds of assistance to democratic nations who were under threat. The idea was that America would help free all people needing to be freed in their eyes. In 1948, the Soviet Union wanted to limit the ability of Great Britain, the U.S., and France to travel. The Berlin blockade cut off all land and water transit between West Berlin and East Germany. The U.S. and U.K. responded by airlifting food and supplies to Berlin from Western Germany. NATO was created in 1949, and it stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was created to unify the Western allies, like US, Canada, Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the US. I already said the US. And it was supposed to unify them in response, or it was supposed to unify the Western Allies' military response to a possible invasion by the Soviet Union and its allies from the future Warsaw Pact. And the Warsaw Pact was created in 1955 as a response to NATO. Like NATO, it was created to protect the member nations from an invasion by the members of NATO. It included the Soviet Union, Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, and Albania withdrew in the 1960s. The Fair Deal was a set of proposals put forward by President Truman during his State of the Union address in 1949. The idea was that American citizens would have health insurance, that the minimum wage would be raised, and that all Americans be guaranteed equal rights by law. This was significant because it came after World War II ended, and it pretty much officially transformed America from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. The Taft-Hartley Act dropped in 1947. It initially was vetoed by President Truman, but Congress overrode the veto. It essentially banned certain practices that unions did. It allowed the president to appoint a board of inquiry to investigate labor disputes, but only when a strike might perhaps endanger the public's health or safety. From 1945 to 1949, China received $3 billion in aid from the U.S. However, communism still prevailed in China, and President Truman is often blamed for, quote-unquote, losing China. On top of everything else happening during the time, there was a huge fear of communist spies in America. The case of Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs launched the nations into a state of fear. A few spies were exposed and even admitting to passing information onto the Soviet Union. The Rosenbergs specifically remained on death row for 26 months, and they both refused to confess or provide evidence against other spies. They were executed in 1953. Japan had occupied Korea since 1910, but in 1945, when they lost the war, the Soviet Union and the U.S. moved into Korea to accept Japanese surrender. After the Japanese surrender, General MacArthur ruled Japan for 7 years and formed an allyship. Both the Soviet Union and the U.S. were in Korea, but neither wanted to move their troops out, so they split up. In 1957, the Soviet Union space program launched Sputnik into space successfully. Sputnik was a basketball-sized object and the world's first artificial satellite and the first man-made object to be placed into Earth's orbit. This was a huge win for the Soviet Union in the space race. To Americans, space was seen as the next frontier to conquer after westward expansion and imperialism. This was combated back and forth by various people and animals and objects going into space by both the Soviet Union and America. In 1969, over a decade later, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, and Michael Collins set off on the Apollo 11 space mission and successfully landed on the moon, winning the space race for the United States. And that was just a various collection of topics that were really common and big topics during the Cold War. And yeah.